Welcome, viewers, to Beyond the Revenue. I'm your host, Jeff Klein. In this episode, we are exploring the hot topic of AI technology in the revenue space. In short, how to see through the fog and find the product that meets your needs. First, according to Deloitte, 83% of companies are prioritizing AI in their business strategies for 2025, supporting a notion that companies feel pressure to adopt it. And I find this to be a bit of a bellwether. Yes, we should be investing the time to understand where AI could benefit the business. But the idea to lap up technology simply to say you're an AI company will lead to weak implementation and disappointing results. For example, a Gartner study conducted in 2024 outlined responses from company executives where 70% of AI initiatives fail to deliver expected outcomes due to poor integration and lack of user adoption. One of the biggest challenges to that for revenue professionals is the explosion of options. We have seen more than a 300% increase in the number of AI-powered sales and revenue tools since 2022. To add more complexity, so many companies are trying to expand beyond their original niche, which again further muddies the waters. Second only to that are the explosion of claims. And what I hear a lot when speaking with founders and early go-to-market teams is that their product has the most accurate or most relevant AI outputs. Forrester recently released findings that 65% of revenue leaders report skepticism about vendor claims regarding AI accuracy and relevance. As of recording this episode, there is no single qualitative metric that I am aware of to validate any of these claims, and we as consumers are largely left to trust but verify. Not to stray too far from the point, but we are certainly in the boom where AI for sales and marketing is expected to surpass $50 billion by this year, 2025. And it's difficult to see what technologies and applications will best resolve our needs, again, leaving us to scramble to invest in the right technologies. So it seems reasonable to suggest that we are all learning here together. And our guest here today has some great ideas on how to find both areas of best application and also how to select the right vendors. So with that, I'd like to introduce our guest, Cliff Simon, to help us cut through the fog of AI-powered technologies in the revenue space. All right. And with that, let's welcome Cliff here to the episode. And Cliff, let's get started and talk through a fun opening question here.
Okay,
so
I'm game.
What have you found particularly and consistently challenging in your career?
Things that I found difficult in my career: managing up, managing out, dealing with ever-changing macroeconomic landscape, right? I hit the job market right as we were having that wonderful crash in '08. So I think I'm like one of the few people in the millennial, I'm a millennial, whatever that means, age group who actually worked through a downturn. But yeah, I've got to see some cool things. And I think the coolest is probably just all the change. Like, technology moves so fast. So along those lines, the biggest challenge is probably change management. The speed at which new things get adopted and the expectation of people to be able to adapt to new workflows, new environments, new technology, new processes.
Very cool. Well, and the speed of changing technologies is certainly at the front of our conversation today, and that's focusing around AI and sort of the challenges with early adoption, and even now moving into more mainstream adoption of AI, especially in the revenue space. So as we pivot to that, I'm curious because we've discussed before in our conversations the idea of rapid experimentation. Tell me a little bit more about what that means when it comes to AI.
I think in the classical sense, when it comes to revenue and rev ops, and a lot of it is typical scientific process. I have a hypothesis. I test the hypothesis. I don't dilute or tamper with the variables too much, right? I want to make sure that there's a control, and I'm trying to figure out how to solve for something. And I look at the evidence, and then based off of that evidence, I make adjustments. We're able to do that so much faster now because AI can help you from a forecasting perspective or from a scenario planning perspective, run through so many permutations where it was really difficult to do that in the past, right? You'd have to be a brainiac and or really, really, really good at Excel and all kinds of data modeling tools to be able to get there and run your regression analysis, et cetera. So I think that's one thing that it's done as far as like experimentation there. On the, like the day-to-day side, it's being able to experiment with positioning, messaging, which personas you're going after. The fact that you can get really good, tight research and information put at your fingertips so that you have the ability to have a high quality test, I think is really different compared to even just like 18 months ago.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think the challenging aspect of the space we're in right now is there's always this bed of claims that seems to be laid out there. You see some of those being debunked, but in the same vein, it's kind of the wild, wild west in the sense of you can say a lot of things, and because there's not like a centralized, like qualitative metric per se. So kind of walking down that path, like what would you recommend to folks as they're looking at these technologies to assess them?
Be critical. The difficulty with the technology today is that the people that are typically trying it and are really gung-ho on it are the folks who are the most educated about this. People who have spent the last 12 to 18 months really diving into LLMs, whether you're creating that air gapped or if you're creating it as part of something that actually touches the internet. How and where are you seeding it with information that is, let's call it, very specific to your organization or very specific to a use case? Even just the way to train the AI with go-to-market knowledge, right? That can vary really widely based off of what you've got at your fingertips or what your company has at its fingertips. And then, are you on a commercial account or not a commercial account? Because are you sharing that knowledge across the board and feeding the bigger LLM? I mean, there's all kinds of security and proprietary concerns there. But yeah, so with that being said, how do you then go about testing, using, and ultimately coming to a decision matrix? So we're doing this internally right now. We're using 4 or 5 AI products. In addition, we're around that like CSM, AI, SDR space, right? I think the one that's probably grabbed the biggest amount of mind share. We're also doing research right now on 20 plus solutions, a rubric of like, how effective is this tool going to be in the market? What level of disruption will we see for the potential roles of the SDR or the CSM because of this tool?
Interesting. Can you share any of those metrics and kind of why you picked them?
Because it's a moving, like we built out a rubric, and now you get a 0 to 5 or 1 to 5 based off of how you score on it, right? It's a little bit qualitative instead of quantitative.
Yeah, I think that's the key assessment piece that's missing right now for a lot of orgs. And I've been through this myself is, quantitatively, speed seems to be one of those things and, to some extent accuracy or completeness, but how do you then measure that from a qualitative perspective? And I think that's
but speed to what? Because if you're
speed to peer, maybe.
If you're just amplifying like a broken process, like do you even have the right things in the background to give it? I think one of the reasons we're going to see tremendous success in the ones that we are using is because we've, as a company, SBI has very well-defined personas. We have really well-defined messaging per persona, user stories per persona, and we break that down by segment, by industry, by product line. So because we have those concepts already dialed in, I can tell the LLM or the AI agent or whatever in this particular case very specifically what I want it to look for. And then I can feed it our research data on top of that. And now I've got a very interesting and compelling argument for driving automation because it's educated, right?
Right.
But most companies don't have that level of granularity committed to paper today.
Right. So there's some prep work is what you're saying in order to maximize your use of AI in various use cases.
Yeah. It's got to map the data and it's got to understand the nuance. How can it do that if you don't tell it?
Yeah. So if you're in an early stage use case and you're trying to test results and your data's a mess,
good luck.
So this comes back to get your data in check. That's one of the first internal things you would suggest to people.
Data and process. Yeah. I know. I feel like this is every single podcast I'm on is like, what's your customer buying journey? What's your go-to-market process? Are those things defined? If you don't have those things defined, how could you possibly hope think about the smartest robot you can think of is come to your website. If it can't scrape your website and get that information, good luck. How are you going to ever be relevant inside of Perplexity or Claude Search?
Yeah. Well, that's really good advice. And there's always that foundational work, especially when you have these, transformational technologies, if you want to go there. To sort of come back to the theme of rapid experimentation, if you were to set up a 2-week beta on any technology or a group of technologies to assess a use case, like how would you recommend to structure that?
Have all that data done ahead of time before you even start the test, because you're going to spend
Well,
most of your time.
assuming we can check both those boxes.
Okay. Assuming you can check both those boxes, I'm probably taking.
Yeah, we're looking for like the outcomes. Like what do we need to measure through the outcomes?
I'm probably taking the person that is the most tech forward on my team and willing to put the extra hours in to try something like this, because we don't want to hurt results, but we also don't have the ability to do this on a wider scale. Have that one person reach out to a very specific set of people that we have had trouble reaching in the past, and see if we can drive a better result over that 2-week period using the positioning and messaging that we've already talked about and created, and see if there's an uptick. Are we getting a better reply rate? Are we booking more meetings? I mean, there's some really easy lines in the sand.
Yeah.
Can I create pipe?
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Can you drive more? Is the application getting out the other end something quantifiable, driving a metric forward effectively is what you're saying?
Exactly, in some way, shape, or form, right? Or if you're using a tool in that kind of vein, can I get to my 12.7 stakeholders that I need? Am I multi-threaded enough? Am I having the right conversations? And is it allowing me to have those conversations with the right personas in the right way? Because the things that my CFO cares about is very different than what my CRO cares about, which is very different from what my CEO and or operating partner cares about.
Right. So we've talked a little bit so far, and that's great advice. And I think that that's something that, many of us can use to really reflect on testing some of these technologies out and figuring out really what's the application there. But to continue on that and sort of flip the script to another subject, we often are talking about what's driving revenue as being more meetings, more bookings, more, more quantitative things, obviously. Another play for AI, obviously, is, removing repetitive tasks and freeing up time. I'm curious from your perspective, like, where have you seen the best applications of that are probably a little bit more difficult to measure? And, what are those activities that you've seen AI really nail that?
I think it's getting better, right? We use several tools internally to help us write our emails, as far as synthesizing the conversation that we just had, doing the follow-up, right? It's not automating the follow-up itself, which I think is the next step, but it's automating the response, and then the human can check against it, make sure that it's correct, and then hit send. Where I think we're going to end up in a very short time frame, maybe even before the end of this year, is an AI assistant that you tell it to go do something, and now it's doing that manual task, right? It's creating my proposal for me. It's updating the fields in Salesforce for me, right? That's what we want. It's technology that allows our top performers to continue to focus on the things that matter. Ultimately, it is quantifiable, right? How much time does a seller out in the field spend doing non-selling related activities? Now, we do a time study at SPI for a lot of our clients, and they're like, wait, how many hours? It's crazy how much time people will spend doing non-selling things when you're paying that person for an outcome. So how can you take that off of their plate and help them focus on the thing that's going to make them and the company more successful?
Yeah, paying people to sell. And if you're paying them to do something other than sales, that's the opposite of enabling sell in that sense. So along those lines too, we want to, it seems reasonable to say that we want AI to help us in the things we don't necessarily want to do, so that we can focus on the things that we need to do in some cases. And I know that's parenthetical in a sense, but one of the things, especially for outbound teams, that sucks up a ton of time is like researching customers and really understanding value proposition and the alignment of that to that customer or to that particular company. I'm curious where you see that really leveraging in to gain those deeper insights.
There's a couple pieces of tech that I've seen that have actually done that fairly well. My friend Jess and her sister Amadea over at Loyi built a really great product that helps digest those 10Ks and a bunch of other publicly available information to help you understand how to write an email and how do you respond. How do you come up and say something that's meaningful to the people that you're talking to? I think that's a great example. Copy.ai does a good job too, right? So we've got these tools out there that are doing this already. I think what we are going to have to figure out is how do we take that front end agentic piece that's going out and doing the work and tying it to the back end of the unstructured data of this corpus of information that we have. How do we get that to all sync together? And what's the overarching model and or series of agents that weaves all of that together?
AI using AI? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah. Well, because it's a lot easier to go and build a single agent that does a very specific task than to go out and build something that can go and, master the universe, right? That's super hyperbolic, but you're going to have an agent that then hands it off to another agent whose entire job is just to do the handoff, right? From one thing to the next. And
right.
I worry about some of the technology that exists today that does these things, especially like workflow automation tools. All of that is going to be wiped out pretty darn quick, I think, when it comes to AI.
You mentioned earlier that, you see the evolution of this in the revenue space, or even beyond that, per se, being something that eventually you can instruct to go and do something. And that AI agent is then going to go, based on the thought thread we were just in now, is going to go engage with other AI agents to get what it needs to do its job. There's a piece there that's missing, which is more of the orchestration between. So is that what you're talking about with this agent that's going and sort of being the traffic cop here, or being the traffic director? Or is there yet another layer in there to that scheme?
So I think there's a couple different ways that you can end up building it. There's the capability today where, take a company like Box, right? They're training their agents because they sit on this entire massive body, right? How many customers do they have? 100 and something thousand, where you have all this unstructured data. They're structuring the data, right? In order to be able to make it queryable, searchable via natural language. So that's the data layer, right?
Yeah.
They have an AI component that's helping to manifest that data layer in a way that it makes it usable. Once that's in a manner that's usable, you can have another agent that comes in and maps that data to the appropriate fields in any system of record, right? Into a database, right? Off of those tables, whether that's a CDP, whether that is a CRM, whatever, right? And once you're at the application layer, now you can start firing off triggers to go into whatever type of action you need to take, right? Am I sending an email? Am I firing off a trigger to a system to create a proposal? Am I leaving a voicemail? Am I sending a LinkedIn note? Like at that, a text message, whatever, right? At that point, it just becomes a triggering mechanism. So yeah, there's going to have to be an activity layer that's going to get tied back to an application layer that gets tied back down to a data layer.
Very interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's and setting all that up right now seems like a challenge of challenges for somebody that's, sitting here listening to this wondering, well, where do I start? Aside from what we already called out as the two key points to setting up any foundation on AI, which is data and knowing your process. But what are the first things you would suggest in any use case here to start? Like, we kind of have built three pillars here, right? The one that actually can do the work, this orchestration piece, and then ultimately your assistant, we'll call it. Obviously, the assistant is probably last, seemingly. So between the other two, like, which from your perspective is the right place to start?
I think most people are going to start at the application layer where they're actually able to trigger things out, right? I think it's the one that most people are familiar with. Going into the data side is going to be far more onerous for most people, and I don't think most people don't play there, right? I'm curious to see how that gets handled over the next 6 to 10 months.
Yeah, I'm curious as well, because, go ahead, sorry.
I think that's the far more important piece. I think it's going to be a lot easier as people, like everyone that's using AI right now, already across the chasm, already very well educated. But for this to not just be a .com bubble kind of bursting in the next few years here, we are going to have to make it so that people that are the laymen of the market, people who are way behind the bell curve, feel comfortable using this type of technology. And in order to do that, they are not going to learn how to do prompt engineering, right? The AI needs to do prompt engineering for you. You need to be able to speak to it the way that you normally would colloquially in order to get the result that you're looking for. And I think that's going to be the tricky part. How do you educate the market? How do you get people comfortable with it? And then how do you structure all this data?
Yeah, and I think as you're listening to feedback out there on some of these, or even talking to sales reps on a lot of these companies that are building these solutions, it's all about prompt engineering. Like, we got to dial in the prompting, we got to work through how we're engineering responses and so on. And it strikes me as the next big leap for AI, especially in the revenue space. Can you see anything else on the horizon that might jump out to you as what could also be another, short-term leap?
I think we've talked about most of them. Maybe not directly.
I heard somebody the other day say that speed was the next big leap. Do you agree with that?
Speed, how so?
I think what they were referring to was the ability to go from point A to Z in your total workflow. So, you're putting something out there from a research standpoint, and you're trying to get all the way through to writing sequenced emails that are personalized and authentic to a customer. So there's several steps that have to happen there, different triggers, different, calls, etc. And eventually you end up at point Z. That right now can take a decent amount of time. If minutes is too long, minutes is obviously a lot shorter than what it might take without it. But I think their point
hours,
was,
weeks.
Yeah, exactly. I think the inevitable though is if speed is the next leap or a next leap, like does that just continue to perpetuate other issues that exist in the market?
I think when you talk about something like speed, right, you end up getting caught in this, I can do this thing so fast. And that's great. But just because you can do it so fast doesn't mean that the rest of the organization at the human level is ready for it, right? Change management is the thing that kills most organizations. So being able to articulate to the necessary people within an organization as to why we're changing a process or why we're trying to do something, it becomes very important. And I think
so. What you're saying is a startup shouldn't just jump out there and run an LLM against 10,000 customers and expect to be, $10 million company overnight.
Yeah, for sure. But I think too, right? Like we're talking about startups. Most of the customers that we're working with are 100 million plus private equity back. There's a different risk profile, a different tolerance. And while you want to move quickly, you can't move so quickly as to break the machine. Mm-hmm. There are things that fundamentally make a business work, and they can be altered over time. And as technology comes on board, we should take care to evaluate it carefully and use it well, but not at the risk of losing revenue or making a bad decision, right? Being too erratic and just too excited about doing something new. So then there's the human
side, right? Penny syndrome.
Well, people, if things are changing really quickly, that change freaks people out. So even if logically it makes sense for a company to do, you still have to get people on board emotionally, right? And make sure that they understand the reason for it and talk them through that. And that might take a couple of weeks to happen, as opposed to the fact that like, hey, if we just did the tech piece without talk, like we can do this in 2 days, right?
One of the things that I often hear when talking to leaders that are hiring RevOps folks is, hey, I need somebody to come in and help me fix X, Y, and Z.
That's cool.
Or build QRNS. The latter obviously being super interesting to most of us. But I'm curious from your perspective, like, why is it important for companies to invest in RevOps early on?
Where do you want me to start? I think that the first reason is I've lived this, both being this guy and then having built to make sure this doesn't happen. You can have a really charismatic sales leader that can come in, that's got a Rolodex, that knows people, that will sell to those people based off those relationships. And yeah, there's product market fit there. How the heck do you capture the lightning in a bottle? How do you understand the motion? How do you understand the processes and what was even happening there if you don't have processes, systems, data collection, and reporting around it? You're putting those things in place in order to help guide and protect the business. And I think a lot of the times that just early days that gets thrown out the window. The other side of it too is most people build the systems reactively to the fact like, oh crap, we've gotten big enough, we need a CRM. Or, oh, we're going to go get funding, we need a CRM. Start small. You can start in Excel. You don't have to go out and buy something off the bat. No need for it necessarily. But when you make that choice, be intentional about the choice. Think about where you're trying to take the company. What are your goals? Are you trying to just continue to build? You're going to go get product market fit, fingers crossed, you get it, you start selling a ton of it, and now you're trying to scale. Cool. That's the dream, right? And to maybe IPO someday. More realistically, you're trying to run a business that's able to survive for the long haul. You're trying to just build something that's profitable. I think that's a vein that a lot of people are looking at today. Or you're trying to build something for M&A. Those different flavors lend to themselves how you think about your operations and how you think about the systems that you're choosing. Because you want to pick, like, for us, we knew we wanted to get purchased someday. Well, we put a 5-year plan together, and it was the most likely candidate to pick us up would either be a private equity firm or strategic management consulting firm. We got by a strategic management consulting firm that happens to be owned by private equity. So, but we knew that being on Salesforce was going to be important for that. And we also knew the pieces of data that they would be looking for as part of a sale. And we started collecting that data from day one because we wanted to be able to tell the story and show all and have the answers for all the things that they would ask.
Yeah, I'd really like to double tap that point because that is, I think, invaluable advice. Not to interrupt you earlier and steal your thunder, but
no, you're fine. Like, it's super valuable for us. A lot of people spend a ton of time putting together deal rooms. Where is this thing? Where is that thing? Can I get it all together? It was fairly painless for us. We had it all. We knew exactly where it lived. All the contracts were in Salesforce. All the product dates were correct. All of that was accurate. So we had a system of truth with the information we needed. We'd been tracking it from the beginning. And I think that really made the process simple and made SBI, who I'm very glad to be a part of now, I think a lot more confident and comfortable in us as an asset because we knew our shit, right? We had it together, and we could back it up, not just with talk, but with data.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. And being able to track not just the metrics themselves, but to show improvement across a broad spectrum of those key metrics is vitally important. And it shows that you're paying attention. You're paying attention to those things, and not to say that people track flippant things, but sometimes that happens. So, your target audience is looking for X, Y, or Z, and you're dialing into that from day one. And that is, and again, now we're triple tapping into but I just want to continue to echo down on that point.
It absolutely makes a difference. It makes an incredible difference.
To wrap up, I'm curious within this early investment concept, how can RevOps professionals in general effectively communicate their value to company leadership? Because that seems to be a challenge that I hear a lot.
That's because most RevOps people today want to get strategic. They do, but they've not been taught how to have those conversations. They still tend to speak, at least from what I've seen, in paragraphs instead of bullet points. They don't speak at an executive level, and they're typically focused on tactical things and not because it's a problem, right? Hey, we've got this thing, people raised an issue, we need to fix this, these are the resources I need to do that, yada yada, as opposed to, this is a problem we have that people have brought to the table. These are a couple other things that are tied to that. And this is the knock-on effect it's having on our ability to either generate revenue, increase NRR, increase GRR, or drive the overall EBITDA, right? If it doesn't tie back to those things, it's very difficult to have an executive level conversation and to have a seat at the table. You have to ultimately always tie it back to the growth of the company, the value of the company, what the board cares about.
Yeah. And that's the big transformation piece too, right? Is taking your role from a tactical position to a thought leader, to a more strategic level role. I've often seen that done various ways, but communicating and keeping your eye on the broader business objectives seems to be what not only you've said, but just sort of re-articulating that as well, because I think that that's a tremendously valuable point to anybody, especially early in their career, to step up to that next level. And again, I'm really grateful to have you on the show here today. I'm really curious. Last question for you here. If you were giving one piece of advice to someone starting in revenue operations, what would that be?
It's actually the same advice I give to my sellers: business acumen. If you can understand, again, what your executive team cares about and what drives the business, and you can help the business get to those things, you will always have either a seat at the table or influence or the ability to learn and grow. I think those are the most important things that you could do. It elevates the conversation both internally and externally.
Very good. Well, Cliff, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate your time today, and thanks for coming on Beyond the Revenue.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.